toxic comfort is a borderline defense. Toxic certainty is a narcissistic defense.
Ooh.
And toxic conformity is a fawn codependent defense. And codependents are right in the middle, so they can swing on comfort. That's where sometimes codependents are more borderline. They're searching for support and comfort. But they give fixes to each other, which are narcissistic defenses. So you could use these pointers to sort of say, is this new person or this person I'm talking to a bit too certain, a bit too moralistic, a bit too rigid inside? That would be a clue of narcissism. And if the person is a bit too comfort-seeking, that'd be like...
And I just wonder, where is the healing on this?
What would be healing just to myself, some sort of healing? What would be healing just to myself, some sort of healing? What would be healing just to myself?
Is this supposed to be healing? Is this supposed to be healing? Is this supposed to be healing?
Those are clues of comfort-seeking, right? It's not seeking certainty of how do I fix things. They might mask it as a fix, but really they want emotional regulation. Even like this.
I had done nothing wrong. I had done nothing wrong. I had done nothing wrong. Don't call me a liar. Don't call me a liar. Don't call me a liar. Don't call me a liar.
I'm just not going to do it anymore. 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 The minute that it changes, then life is perfect again. I don't even remember the last 20 hours.
You see how that's comfort seeking? It's not certainty seeking. It's not injunctions. Emotional comfort and validation. That's a borderline defense. But we're human, so we're going to go through phases of being more emotional, irrational, more borderline defense. And then we're going to go through phases of more rigid certainty, a more intellectual disgust, black and white type defense. That's more certainty. That's the guts of the topic.
Yes, now I remember hearing how he talked about the borderline is...
See? Now you're remembering some of the
self.
stuff from the video. See?
Yes.
I'm trying to link
Got it.
Trying to simplify it down into something easy instead of all his terms. Huh. How do I cover this? So one of the challenges of if I present this to you in a way that's too intellectual or abstract, that feeds your certainty, answer, muscle, desire, your narcissistic drive. Also, if I give it to you where you understand it, you say,
I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm just not going to do it
oh,
anymore.
I got it. I'll just change. It's in my head.
I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm just not going to.
That's going to feed your comfort. And then you're going to take the comfort and certainty, and then you're just going to say, I'm going to force myself to do it because I love conforming. I will fawn and I will be safer. And then you have toxic codependency, toxic conformities. How do I transmit the message emotionally so you can see it modeled or role modeled, so you can digest it, so you can see through the toxicity? It's not about all three of these things are good things. It's just toxic levels of this where you avoid reality, where you hide in fantasy. That's the problem. Because if you hide in fantasy, then you can't, there's tons of the world that you're just blocking out. You have to find other people that will share your fantasy. And that's a minority. And most of those people are manipulative, or untrustworthy, or selfish, right? So the shared fantasy is all right, but the partners you play with are all parasites or unreliable. So diving into shared reality and how to navigate that with healthier levels of comfort, conformity, and certainty, that would be the ideal. That would be the way out. So toxic conformity, or no, toxic comfort. Yeah, that'll be the first. How do we spot comfort? We will use Sam Vaknin's favorite person. See if anyone understands this.
So the borderline's imaginary friend kind of pats her on the head. You're a good girl. I love you. You're safe with me, etc., etc. This is the initial phase.
Very soothing. Comfort, safety, healing, emotional regulation. Not bad, but excessive protection, excessive comfort weakens people's muscles, weakens people's ability to tolerate reality. It actually makes people super pacified and crippled if you give too much comfort.
When you're comforted, when you're loved, when you're held, when you're contained, this creates regulation. And so the borderline learns to regulate her internal environment. She learns to regulate her emotions, her moods, even her cognitions, via the agency of the imaginary friend.
Right.
Nothing can come from the inside. Everything comes from within the fantasy. And the fantasy must include an imaginary friend. The borderline's fantasy is object-centered. When the borderline is forced...
So this is his pointer, that the borderline is object-centered from the outside. So the mother initially is the object. And the mother is a source of breast, food, sustenance. Suck on the tit, that's the Melanie Klein's model. So then as the borderline defense grows up, now they look for other role models of comfort and support from the outside that matches the imaginary friend on the inside. And then that's how the favorite person ends up being the imaginary friend projected onto an outside person. That'll be the second half of the video.
To modify her fantasy, what she does, she finds someone out there which is a kind of liaison to reality, a bridge to reality, flesh and blood person. His job is to provide her with reality testing. Okay. He becomes her reality.
This is the weakness. This is the strength and the weakness. So you can find another person outside instead of an imaginary friend to navigate reality, to sort through reality. But then if that imaginary friend, the favorite person, gets triggered, then whatever that person says becomes reality because there isn't a filter for self-reality mechanism. Or that ego mechanism to sort through reality, what's true and what's not true, is not developed yet. So it will give too much power away to negative identity, which was the last meeting.
Who I am is in response to how I'm defined, to how I'm defined, to how I'm defined. Who I am is in response to
you'll
how
let
I'm
other
defined,
people,
to how I'm defined, to how I'm defined.
especially your favorite person, define you. And you'll be trapped by that because you haven't learned, or if a borderline position, you haven't learned how to define yourself in shared reality. You only know how to define yourself in shared fantasy. Which isn't bad because it's comfort. Comfort isn't bad. You just have to learn how to tolerate reality. That's the downside.
If you talk to borderlines, they will tell you, he's my life.
Yeah.
He's my life, he's my world. The first thing she passes on to this person is regulatory functions. The fantasy is supposed to stabilize the borderline, supposed to regulate her. So if she is dysregulated, it means the fantasy is failing. And she cannot afford this. If she comes to believe that the fantasy had failed, she will commit suicide. End of story.
Okay.
So what she does, she takes everything in her, all the internal processes that conflict with the fantasy, and she hands them over to a partner. So she
hands it over to favorite person or some external projection. For Richard Grannon, maybe his audience is his favorite person. That'll be a teaser for the next video clip.
She tells the partner, I'm dysregulated. Please regulate my emotions. My moods are up and down. Please stabilize my moods. She tells the partner, please change my internal processes so that they don't conflict with the fantasy, so that I don't have to get rid of the fantasy. He becomes a facilitator of the fantasy. He enters the fantastic space. And together they create a shared fantasy.
And codependents also seek toxic comfort. So support groups, if you end up getting validation and too much cookies.
The time has come for this cookie! Bye-bye.
You get addicted to toxic comfort, a borderline strategy which weakens you. Now you can only make friends and support groups that give you fake validation. And then when you don't get the fake validation, you can say,
I'm sorry, you're not being helpful to me right now. Being helpful to me right now. I'm sorry, you're not being helpful to me right now.
Be more fucking constructive. Be more fucking constructive. Be more. Someone say it right now. Someone say it right now.
They're basically having an emotional reaction and blaming you. They're basically having an emotional reaction and blaming you. They're basically having an emotional reaction.
So you can get addicted to comfort, borderline or not, codependent. You slowly get used to comforting words, emotional reasoning, circular logic.
She swallows the partner, she internalizes him, she assimilates him.
Yeah.
She idealizes the partner. So she photoshops him. It's like, she changes him so that he fits into the fantasy.
Okay.
From that moment, the partner regulates the internal environment of the borderline, which allows her to keep the fantasy, and everyone is happy.
Yes.
Until he doesn't. Yeah. And then she falls apart because it endangers the fantasy.
When the supply or the regulator falls apart, or needs space or whatnot, or gets triggered, then things get exciting. And we're suspecting that maybe Richard Grannon maybe his supply is not stable because this is his toxic comfort video where I added some fluff to try to point out the excess comfort. So when he says fluff, that means I need comfort. It's intellectual comfort.
Fluff defense. Total comfort at all times. Fluff to avoid any and all kind of pain. Fluff. Anything that knocks you out of comfort will be perceived as threat. Fluff defense. Everything in us that we've evolved to today will tend to want to conserve energy. Fluff. We call this moralistic, we call this laziness. Fluff, but it's, in my view, adaptive. It's a good thing to be lazy.
I could play the whole video, but it's so confusing. I tried to summarize, but it still doesn't capture the self-defining stuff to try to make his addiction, or his desire for comfort, normal. He's trying to explain to himself, mostly. But also to the audience that comfort-seeking isn't bad, which is just another variation of healing and safety-seeking.
And I just wonder, where is the healing on this?
What would be healing just to myself, some sort of healing. what would be healing, just
So healing, safety, and comfort are all essentially the same pointer. It's emotional dysregulation, so I need someone external to help me emotionally regulate. Which is part of social and relationships, but if you give up all your power away to somebody else, then that gets you into trouble, because then when you don't have somebody, then you fall apart. Or you become this. So.
It's, in my view, adaptive. It's a good thing to be lazy. Fluff. Those of us who just burn calories for the sake of burning calories, well, they would have died. They wouldn't have fluffed. They wouldn't have procreated. They wouldn't have carried.
Those of us who just burn calories would have died because they don't procreate. If you aren't burning calories to chase after food, you would have died from starvation hiding in your damn cave in comfort. And isn't he exercising and burning off all the calories? So this logic is rather simple to critically think out, but he's believing it.
On their genes. Fluffed. It's a fluff defense to keep us inside of our comfort zone. Fluffed. The only solution I can see to this, fluffed, is not just counterintuitive. Fluffed. It might even be contrary to our genetic tribes. Fluffed, which is we have to actively seek risk. Fluffed.
Actively seeking risk is part of our survival instincts. It is not against our genetics. The people that hid in caves and didn't seek food, didn't they starve? The people that didn't defend the cave and build structures, didn't their towns get overrun by neighboring tribes that killed them and stole all the resources? Taking on risk, burning calories, and protecting your comfort, protecting your space, seeking out resources, that means getting outside of your comfort zone.
To see yourself as being strong, as resilient, which you are. Fluffed, which you are. Fluffed, which you are.
Which you are. Isn't that emphatic? Look at his eyes. He's like trying to... You better believe that you're strong and emphatic, just like he does. Look at that.
You are. Fluffed. To see yourself as being flexible and adaptive. It's a fluff defense to keep us inside of our comfort zone. Discomfort leads to growth. Fluffed. The only solution I can see to this, fluffed. We have to actively seek risk. Fluffed. Discomfort leads to progress. Fluffed, fluffed, fluffed.
So one clue for comfort seekers with toxic comfort is they'll just decide to do something and they think the decision means that they're halfway there or they're 2/3 are already done. Where the decision, I would argue, maybe 10% at most. The hard part is implementing the crap, because you can decide it, believe it.
I'm just not going to do it anymore. 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 I'm just not going to do it anymore.
That doesn't mean it's going to change anything. It's just a nice saying that makes you feel good. Comfort seeking. So this is Richard Grannon from about a year ago, 8 months ago.
I've been teaching this for 7 years. Don't be like me. Don't be like me. Deal with your childhood stuff. Get real. And I was like, well, this looks like an emotionally abusive relationship. And if this person doesn't have NPD, these are certainly narcissistically abusive tactics. I remember, what would it cost you if you found out, if you let yourself believe that this is true NPD? Well, it would cost me my whole identity.
So he's negotiating with himself that if he blocks reality, blocks a potential option of his observations, that's going to cause emotional pain. You see, toxic comfort. Where if he was toxic certainty, he might be trying to spin the story to make a cheap win. That'd be more of a narcissistic defense. He might fragment something and then argue about some certainty, get a win, rewrite the story. But he's trying to block feedback, counter-dependent, to make the fantasy stronger, to protect comfort.
As somebody who can talk about narcissism, it possibly means I'd have to shut the whole thing down. If I can still get caught in this, who am I to talk about it? If you're not healed from your stuff and you still have a craving for this, you can read whatever books you want. You can watch whatever YouTube videos you want. Go to as many seminars as you want. You'll still do what I just did. You'll still do it. I've been teaching this for 7 years. Don't be like me. Don't be like me. Deal with your childhood stuff. Get real. Do your psychotherapy. If you have a father wound, if you have a mother wound, if you have an attachment disorder, if you experienced intense childhood abuse, you don't want to look at. Of course you don't. Of course you don't. In my case, it was sexual.
See, or does anyone see how he's still using a comforting tone? And he's using discomfort to try to motivate you. Because it's just this narrow spectrum of comfort and discomfort, which is just code word for shame, toxic shame, and fantasy shame. That's the motivator for toxic comfort. Toxic shame and fantasy decision. I'm healed. Another form of shame. Fantasy and toxic shame. And then certainty spectrum is blame and guilt and judgment, morality. So those are the two sectors of how narcissists and borderline defenses operate. And it's human. We're all human, so we're going to have a more guilt-based focus, blame and guilt. And then we're going to have a more shame, cover up or uncover strategy.
I want to sit there talking about fucking being groomed and
And right here, when he's imagining the process, he's actually embodying the emotions from the imagination. He's having a pre-experience of the emotion because he's highly sensitive to comfort and discomfort. That's just how he's wired. Not necessarily good or bad, but he's going to use this as his leaning. I will motivate myself with discomfort. But now he's an influencer, which means getting real feedback he can block. So having an accountability partner to sort of keep him in check, that might be missing.
What? Why would I? But if I don't, if I refused, which was the state I was in, I'm still vulnerable to these people. You have to embody it. You have to do your work. You have to do your stuff. It's your shit, your pain, your suffering, everything you don't want to look at. That's what gets you. That's what gets you.
What does that mean?
Don't want to look at. That's what gets you. You have to embody it. You have to do your work. You have to do your stuff. It's your shit, your pain, your suffering, everything you don't want to look at. That's what gets you.
Everything you don't want to look at, that's what gets you. Yes, he's diving into certainty, but it's that's the everything, and that's the certainty. But it is around the narrative of comfort. He wants to rush the solution. So let me get all the discomfort in now with a story. Let me believe it with all my heart, which is what my critique of the 30-day challenge was. And also maybe of unplugging the matrix. You're trying to rush a natural process, which is maybe my strength of more codependent conformity. You have to work with your nature. You can't overform yourself into some rigid Frankensteinian nonsense. So he's simplifying. Since I use cover-up strategies, I will uncover everything that's painful. I will do it all at once, and then I'm healed. I will force myself to deal with the discomfort because I am a highly discomfort-sensitive, comfort-sensitive mindset. So that's how I'm going to guide my healing.
That's what gets you. I'm talking about somebody who had their soul scooped out in childhood and something dark put in its place. The true codependent is absolutely entrained into a slave mindset and cannot know love through any other way. People like me, a true codependent, we are sick, very, very sick people. Total addicts.
That's toxic shame. He's using toxic shame to try to motivate himself, but it won't stick tomorrow because he's in a different mood. His moods go up and down, so using excess comfort and excess discomfort to modulate your focus is not a stable way of navigating reality.
Total addicts. It's really sad. I've been teaching this for 7 years. Don't be like me. Don't be like me. Deal with your childhood stuff. Get real.
So Holly was watching the video and thought that Richard Grannon was giving answers to Sam Vaknin that was more narcissistic. So I'm going to make an argument that I think he's more borderline, because he also thinks he's more borderline.
I would be on the spectrum for borderline personality disorder. People say, oh, you're confident, therefore you're a classic narcissist. You know me. I'm not like that in real life. I'm an introverted guy. I'm quite sensitive. And I'm prone to emotional dysregulation and a labile sense of self. So clinically, if I was anything, I was borderline. Just because I'm saying I would get that clinical diagnosis, or I would have done in my early 30s, I don't accept it. I don't accept it.
Any reason why? Let's see.
With borderline, I think it's 11. And they do a laundry list of equally weighted traits. And if you tick 5 of 11, you got your clinical diagnosis of borderline. The 5 of 11 could be like self-destructive patterns of behavior, interpersonal turbulence, labile sense of self, fits of rage. Yeah, or maybe you're 16 years old, or you're traumatized, or, you know, you have PTSD or CPTSD, and these things are resolvable. CPTSD, and these things are resolvable.
So if you have PTSD and CPTSD, because at 16 years old you had some giant abuse, and CPTSD and PTSD is resolvable, how is that counter to being borderline? Because borderline is also resolvable. It has a much higher rate of success versus narcissism. And I think Sam Vaknin said some study like it by mid-40s or late 50s, there's automatic symptom dropping of borderlines without any sort of strong interventions. So he's telling him this stuff to just confuse everyone else and confuse him, to sort of muddy the waters to make him more comfortable. That's toxic comfort. So when you're in groups and you're seeing people just word salad stuff, already, and they're just muddying the waters or saying stuff to distract and also self-soothe, that's a sign of toxic comfort. And if you start falling into that, then you can say, oh, maybe you have to focus on values. That's sort of the moral side, moral philosophy. But more so, you have to find yourself. That's Act 3, sort of. So here's a metaphor to sort of show that we can't be too comforting. Too much music. So you have a baby hatching. If you were to be comforting and you were to help break that hatching, to help limit the energy from breaking the hatching, from the little baby chick, you would actually be enabling weakness and helping them die because they have to fight and struggle to get strong, to live. But if you're on the toxic comfort side, just watching the baby chick struggle might cause you discomfort. But this is nature. This is how, and it's probably time increased. Sped up? Yeah, it's sped up. So this would be much slower. You'd have to watch it in live speed. Then slowly it's moving around. Here's a smaller bird. Oh, this has sound. All right. See how nature works? It's sort of, if you invade somebody else's stuff and offer too much comfort, you're messing with the process. It takes time for people to find themselves and get their strength. So if you've grown up and you were invaded with toxic comfort and smothering, then what else can we say about safety? Safety can be designed, or privileged safety, toxic comfort can come out as aggression. That's sort of Gabe's version.
I'm just whining. I'm sorry, you guys are reading into stuff. Is this supposed to be healing? Is this be more fucking constructive? Guys, I'm asking a question.
But it doesn't have to be that obvious. It could be more subtle. So Sarah Ness sort of describes it, I think.
Psychological ideas, the idea of psychological safety, that we can't actually have a good conversation unless we're feeling, to some extent, safe with each other. It kind of has our nervous system relax. And there's these ideas of like polyvagal theory and nervous system activation and zone of tolerance that go along with that. And also, I want to say a thing there. Oftentimes we think of that as de-escalation only. Like, okay, if I'm in conflict with you, I have to get quieter. I have to be reasonable. I have to be with you right now, right? That can be perceived as a power move by the other person. If one person is upset and angry and they're like, I want to get my view across, and the other person is going, well, let's calm down here, right? It's actually kind of a status move, power move. So some of what we'll play with is how and when do you meet someone at the level of intensity that they have, or in the meme or language that they're speaking? What are we talking about? And so that idea of memes as well has been influential for me, of like, what is the full belief system that someone is in? And then how do I speak in that? How do I use the same metaphors they do? How do I use some of the same words? How do I get curious about parts of it that I don't understand? How do I reflect their argument in a way that they can agree with it? And even imagine things that they haven't fully said in it. Like, oh, I imagine something important to you here.
Who can follow everything that she's saying? So is she using a combination of toxic comfort by zigzagging to create extra discomfort in you? And then while zigzagging, she was promising a teaser. Answer's about to come here. It's about to come here. And then she's just taking it away. This constant taking it away. And then her tone is sort of this pacifying tone of relaxing, which is playing on comfort, soothing. So it seems it has comfort, but it also has some like certainty. So it has a little bit of narcissistic strategies, but maybe it's more comfort focused.
Is having your friends and family safe? Is that true? Like, what does that look like to you? What are we talking about? So there's this kind of digging deeper that nonviolent communication also goes a lot into, which is an influence of mine of like, what are we talking about? What do I see? What is underneath it? What needs do I have in this situation? What are we talking about? Which in this case, I'm kind of collapsing into the idea of concerns or values, motivations. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? What are we talking about? It kind of has our nervous system relax, relax, relax.
This is a bit more hypnotic. This is a bit harder to see because it's advanced. Maybe this is advanced toxic comfort. This is maybe a simpler version.
Is really through what I would say.
Safety is the treatment. It's so, in a sense, so simple, isn't it? Because
you could actually look at her reactions to see somebody who's addicted to comfort, maybe. Let's see.
Shaming and blame. How's your body feel? Does it feel open, accessible? Is it going to, in a sense, recruit its own homeostatic systems to heal on any level? Or is it going to hunker down and protect itself from the world that we're in? Protect itself from the world that we're in. The metaphor is the old Star Trek movies where if they're going into a dangerous place, the energy shields go up. The energy shields are using energy. Defense uses energy and diverts in our brain the ability to reach higher cortical areas because we can't, in a sense, be creative, be spiritual, be benevolent unless our bodies are safe. Are the cues that your body's responding to cues of safety or the cues of threat? So what we now really would say is safety is the treatment. Safety is the treatment.
Safety, comfort, healing, the sort of vague emotional soothing, emotional reasoning, based on his discomfort with reality or his need for extra healing and validation.
Because if we remove cues of threat, the body can then move back into this calmer, safe state to support its own health, growth, and restoration.
But then you fall into safetyism, and safetyism is a trap because you can create the illusion, the feeling of safety, but it doesn't really raise your odds of security. It doesn't actually make you any safer. It just creates the feeling of safety. That's sort of this observation.
The umbrella, the canopy, the part that's actually blocking the rain, that's security. Feeling safe is how we feel underneath. Safety is feeling warm and dry, but security is the overarching umbrella. You have a child who is sleeping soundly in their own bed. They may be physically secure, but they're not going to feel safe if they think there's a monster hiding in the closet. And while a mother's love may make you feel safe, a mother's love alone is not enough to keep you protected from the hazards of the outside world. The difference ultimately between safety and security is the safeguards that are in place that we expect to work so that we can feel safe knowing that they are working. And the problem is when there's a breakdown in the security, we have an overemphasis of anxiety because now we feel that our safety is threatened. Think about just like in terms of being in a car accident. If you are safe in your car, But then you go driving down the street and you get broadsided. Even though the next time you go out, you're still just as safe as you were before, you may not feel secure because everyone else isn't abiding by those same rules of the road.
Main thesis of the book, when you feel secure, but you're not actually safe.
The safety trap is a phrase that I coined a few years ago when trying to explain to my clients the false sense of security that comes when our fear has been abated, but risk remains. Our fear has been abated, but risk remains. Risk remains. Risk remains.
So that's the difference of this group, is that if I give you advice that pacifies your fears and gives you a sense of safety, but then you go out there and you don't have the skills, you can't spot it and you can't apply it. It's not increasing your security. It's not increasing your actual battle, future conflict interactions that you'll do better. It's just conning you into a sense of safety now, using word salad and other stuff to give you a cheerleading, rah-rah, that doesn't raise your security.
Security that comes when our fear has been abated, but risk remains. Our fear has been abated, but risk remains. Risk remains. Risk remains.
That's sort of the first part of this video.
Psychoeducation can be, I think, often a false therapy. It makes the therapist often feel better than the client. The big danger here,
and if you have a therapist that's addicted to toxic comfort, it's very easy for them to say something to make you feel better or make them feel like they're doing a good job, so they don't really care about your actual results. They want you to have some feeling of success.
I think this is very rife at the moment, is that we can teach people into feeling better. And I think that's bullshit, particularly for this clientele. It doesn't mean there isn't a place for psychoeducation, but psychoeducation can be, I think, often a false therapy. It makes the therapist often feel better than the client. And then the client's in a position of having to either reject the psychoed or feel completely unheard and unresponded to, or compliantly agree, in which case you have a pretend relationship.
Pretend relationship. So then the toxic comfort therapist is triggering toxic conformity of a codependent. It's a beautiful symbiotic repetition compulsion relationship. Except the therapist gets the money, so it's not an even exchange. Both people are reliving toxicity. But all this really isn't new. It's addressed by Coddling of the American Mind. They're 3 pointers. Slightly different, but this might get me to certainty. Act 2.
The coddling of the American mind, how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failures.
My first book was called The Happiness Hypothesis. It was about the psychological wisdom of the ancients. The ancients understood how to thrive, how to get along with people. And so they gave us principles like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but we've somehow begun teaching kids that what doesn't kill them might make them weaker. We need.
So that's toxic comfort. Risk and danger and wasting energy will kill you. That's anti-genetics, whatever Grannon was trying to argue. So that's the number one untruth of fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Or what someone says can toxically shame you and you're forever in danger. That's sort of this new postmodern something. Number 2, what's number 2?
To protect them from words and things like that. The second great untruth is always trust your feelings. And the third is life is a battle between good people and evil people.
So number 2 is emotional reasoning. So is that trust your feelings, which means if I can say words to manipulate your feelings, then now I can control you. toxic conformity. I make you a slave by getting you to trust emotional reasoning or circular logic. Or I don't give you time to have critical thinking, talk things out. I give you sanctions, I control the whatever argument, so then you have to fall into your feelings because you don't have time to make sense of what's happening. So emotional reasoning will be Act 3, how to get around that. Act 2 is a toxic certainty, untruth of us versus them.
I hope we'll be able to talk about here about how these bad ideas got into the educational system, into our child rearing.
Let's talk about always trust your feelings. Because aren't we raised, Greg, follow your heart, pay attention to your feelings, keep in tune with your gut. So I'm always thinking you're supposed to trust your feelings. Sure. You say, listen, sometimes your feelings mislead you.
I learned the hard way through really terrible bouts of depression that sometimes your mind is telling you things that aren't so nice and that you shouldn't be listening to.
Emotional flashbacks. So if you have grief and you have emotional flashback, your mind is going to be tainted with your unresolved grief and telling you stuff that's distorted. If you just take it at face value, it might be out of context.
Like
that, well, the common cognitive distortions, as they call them in CBT, are like saying you're broken, or if this date doesn't go well, I'm done for, or if this job interview fails, that I'll never get a job again.
Catastrophizing. So one of the greatest ideas from every culture is that there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so, is how Shakespeare put it. Our life is the creation of our minds, is how Buddha put it. And so as students are coming into a new situation, should they interpret everything as dangerous, threatening, and aggressive? Or should they interpret it as a cornucopia full of opportunities? And so how students learn to frame things will greatly affect whether they thrive or whether they retreat into a shell in a defensive crouch in college. We all want to protect our kids. And as societies have fewer and fewer children, and as the safety of those children goes up and up and up, we find smaller and smaller things to worry about.
One of my favorite lines is prepare the children for the road, not the road for the child.
That's
right. Yeah.
Well, you also have an interesting anecdote, too, about peanut butter, which is a good kind of thing.
Let's protect your kids from peanuts. They're more likely to have peanut allergies.
You say, parents, let your kids have a couple of bumps. It's okay. It's okay.
Yep. Absolutely.
So toxic certainty, how to present this. The certainty trap. This might be shocking, because America's all about you control your future, your reality, you have agency, free will over destiny. So how well do people think they have good certainty at predicting happiness? That's the American dream. You do this and you chase happiness, you buy this stuff, you get happiness. That's marketing, right? So, but the psychological and sociological research says that people kind of aren't too good at choosing things that make them happy. Are people ready to hear this? Killjoy, maybe.
Do we know what makes us happy?
A lot of the time we don't. Now, of course, I know that if my kid gets a great report on his report card, I know that makes me happy. It does make me happy. Everybody thinks that that a variety of things that have a big impact on them don't really. And Wilson has also shown that people are terrible about predicting what kinds of effects on things in life. So if you've got people who are college students who are dating, and you ask them, what do you think, what would it do to you if this were to break up? Miserable, I wouldn't be able to hold my head up, I couldn't sleep, and so on. Actually, that's not true. Or the unpleasantness only lasts for a small amount of time. Even everybody assumes they'd be thrilled and delighted forever if they won the lottery. That only lasts for a few weeks, and actually lottery winners end up being less happy than they were before. I mean,
for a few weeks. That's all.
I mean, their neighbors are begging them for money, etc. If you ask people, what do you think it would do to you to become paraplegic, couldn't move your leg, people take it for granted that would wreck their lives. And of course, it's terrible for a while. But eventually, I mean, they're never as happy as they were before or as the average person, but the misery does not last. And they find pleasure in things that we don't. They say, I enjoyed brushing my teeth today. So, I mean, there's a notion that we don't understand how good our psychological immune system is. That is, ways we have of lifting ourselves up, and we don't know what the hell is going on. Dissonance reduction is one. You know, somebody moves from the Midwest to California, but it's a different job, and he has to go to a small house, and so on. He's going to lose some things. But he reduces dissonance by saying, you know, who wants to take care of a big house like I had in the Midwest, and the weather here just covers a multitude of sins, and so on. So we're very good at rationalizing, explaining away, at making things better than we think we could.
So rationalizing, coming up with reasons, creating some logic, that's the land of toxic certainty. In a sense, that's sort of what academia is, teaching you to make these logical arguments to protect being right or wrong. But it's not helping you be happy, because happiness is a broader perspective.
We don't understand that we will adapt. It's amazing how ignorant we are of things that are really important to us, and how much we insist that we know why these things happened or would happen. My favorite study in this whole line of work.
What things are important to us, that's the land of morality. That's the land of moral values. So the superego gets hijacked by the codependent or the narcissist, and the superego is supposed to be linked to your conscience, a clear conscience. It's supposed to be linked to a greater morality, but if you start rewriting what's important to you just based on your guesses of what will make you happy, or what should make you happy, you're likely to not get happiness, because you're just making stuff up, where there's a long history of civilizations trying to figure out what the meaning of life is. They have plans of how to have a meaningful life, and if you just throw that out the window based on some modern interpretation that hasn't been tested, that's part of the moral dilemma.
It was done with Harvard women for a period of a month. At the end of each day, say, how good was your day? I mean, how happy?
So these were Harvard students, which means they're probably stupider about happiness, or they're smarter. Harvard's a pretty good school, right? So they have a survey.
Were you? How satisfied with it were you? What day of the week was it? How was their sex life that day? How did the work go? How much sleep did you get? Etc. And you now, at the end of all of this, you can see how much these things actually affected their mood. And you ask people, oh, by the way, we'd just be interested in knowing how much you think each of these things influenced your mood in general. There was no correlation whatsoever between the actual impact of these things on people's mood and people's reports about the mood. We have a conviction that we know things like, I mean, you're telling me I don't know what makes me happy or unhappy? I mean, give me a break. Sorry, can't give you a break.
So if you decide with certainty this will make you happy, not happy, and you end up getting it wrong, or the history, the sociological research is people don't know themselves well enough to guide your life to make yourself happy. And if you're living, even worse, with a negative identity, where is it? Oh, there.
Who I am is in response to how I'm defined, to how I'm defined, to how I'm defined. Who I am is in response to how I'm defined, to how I'm defined, to how I'm defined. Who I am is in...
So if I don't get insulted if I avoid all my pain, somehow that leads to happiness. That's even more of a sloppy strategy to pursue meaning or happiness. But you could be American. And if you're American, you might have these fallacies.
We really have no insight into why we do the things that we do. Planning fallacy. When there's any sort of complex thing that we have to do in the future, we're really bad at planning for it. Despite our best intentions to do something, to plan for this thing, an assignment, whether it be anything, we're just horrible. I mean, it's like we only see the best sort of situation that's gonna get us from point A to point B.
I'm totally guilty of the planning fallacy. I go away on holiday.
So if we equated right versus wrong, right is best, right is happy. Certainty is happy, certainty equals good, good is not evil, good equals happy, good equals purity, all these sort of simplistic moral frameworks, because religion is dead, God is dead. We can just write our morality, and morality is written by scientism, it's written by academia, it's written by pop psychology, self-help.
Holiday, and I bring 4 books, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna read on the plane, and I'm gonna read on the beach, and it's gonna be awesome. And of course, by the time the end of the holiday rolls by, I've read maybe a couple of chapters.
That's right. Another one that's kind of on that line of seeing yourself in the best sort of frame. I'm going to be this, diligent scholar and so on. Is something called the above average effect. And so we like to see ourselves as being above average in every respect. We're more talented, we're better drivers, we are more attractive, we're more moral, we're more sympathetic. There's a whole bunch of different experiments to demonstrate that we judge ourselves to be far better than average. He kind of describes this idea of how bad we are at self-assessment.
If I think of all the people who are watching this video, I'm going to ask them all a simple question. Are you in the bottom half of driving skills? Now, half of you should say yes, but having seen this, having done this in live time, probably 1 out of 100 will say yes. And yet half of you, by definition, are in the bottom half of driving skills. Right. The evidence is absolutely crushing that people cannot assess where they're at. They basically start with the premise that they're at about 70% and then go up and down from there.
I'd like to think that we're a little better than Jeff Norman kind of lets on in terms of, predicting how good of a driver we are or something. Now, obviously we're teaching this stuff, so you'd like to think that we're kind of immune to this sort of planning fallacy and above average effects and so on, but that's not actually the case. There was another experiment done, and she looked at university professors and asked them to judge how good they were compared to their colleagues. And 94% of these university professors judged themselves to be better than average at teaching, which obviously average is 50%, and we're way off on that scale. So, I'd like to think that we're kind of immune to these sort of effects and biases, but maybe I'm just being a little bit too idealistic. We really have no insight into why we do the things that we do.
So academia, or science, is promoting toxic certainty. We're estimating ourselves as higher skilled. We're estimating our self-knowledge of ourselves, or just the mental model, as competence. That feels like it's equal, but it's a logical jump or something. Okay, I wanted to cover more Vaknin stuff. I'm not sure if this is going to link well. But this is Vaknin describing the differences between borderline object constancy and narcissist introject constancy. So if you are afraid of, if you're addicted to toxic certainty, the way to control that is to have introject. Your mental models are more certain, and then you just force reality to fit into your mental models. You force other people to fit into your snapshots. Let's see if this can make any sense.
The snapshot has to be static. Snapshot has to be static. The minute there is a gap between the external object and the introject that represents the internal object, this creates anxiety. In the devaluation phase, the anxiety is maximal, because the external object is devalued and the internal object is still idealized.
So the theory is that there's introject constancy for a narcissist. So their snapshots of everybody in the world is perfect, it's pure, it's certain. And then if you are being devalued, you are an external object. Their view of you inside as a perfect snapshot is fine. Their relationship with their introject is pure. But you being off center from their introject is why they're allowed to totally destroy you. They're not devaluing their introject of you. They're devaluing you because you as an external object are supposed to shapeshift. You're supposed to conform to fit their certainty. That's narcissism. That's why they have anxiety, because they're attached to their introject constancy. And then you are just a shape-shifting puppet that's supposed to conform and stay at that idealized snapshot they have of you. A bit tricky of a concept, but it's relatively simple. It's just hasn't been presented this way from other models.
The tension between the two is infinite almost. So to resolve this, the narcissist half-heartedly attempts to hand over the introject. He would make contradictory statements. He would say, I can't trust you, but you've always been my best friend. You are a slut, but you are very pure. The minute he tries to hand over the introject, he experiences tremendous abandonment anxiety, and he stops. He withdraws the introject back, and he gets stuck with the introject for life. Snapshot has to be static. So narcissists have libraries of introjects, all of them active, all of them idealized, which explains hoovering. As long as the introject exists in the narcissist's mind, and there is a devalued external object somewhere, there is this tension. The narcissist at some point is overwhelmed by the anxiety, and he needs to rematch. And so what he does, he re-idealizes the partner so that it matches the introject, reduces the anxiety, and this is hoovering. So when you talk about object constancy, the borderline maintains.
So that's hoovering. Hoovering sometimes doesn't make sense because your side, you remember the devalue. You remember the ups and downs, but the narcissist only sees you in their introject on the inside as a constant. They remember you as the constant, and then they just, you as an external thing that changes, that can always shift back to the introject, the snapshot. It doesn't feel natural because you're not, if you're codependent, you don't process people this way. So it's a little bit of a hard pitch, but that sort of internal introject constancy is their world. Everything outside is Play-Doh. They're playing God. That's why it's a morality defense. They can just bend everybody else to fit into their introjects. That's another way of describing narcissistic supply. If they can get other people to bend into their introject, then they feel grandiose. And if the world is not caving to their introjects, their view of how everyone fits, that's when they have narcissistic injury and they're falling apart and they're fragmenting.
Reduces the anxiety, and this is hoovering. So when you talk about object constancy, the borderline maintains her fantasy by finding an external object, a real person, who helps her to regulate her internal environment so that this internal environment corresponds, matches the fantasy. To allow the partner to function inside her The partner needs to be there all the time, not a minute away. It needs to be there all the time. Object constancy is the belief or the conviction that an external object will remain in your life regardless of difficulties or friction. Or the borderline develops object constancy with her intimate partner, but not introject constancy.
So that's the two polar opposite strategies. Toxic comfort is object constancy. Having an external person or external group, maybe for Richard Grannon, to provide comfort, to be a source of attention and comfort, to help emotionally regulate. External object constancy. Narcissism is internal introject constancy. So they have relationships in their head, and then they do anything goes to manipulate external objects to fit all the infinite snapshots they have of people, one-dimensional experiences of people. So if you have someone that's arguing about one slice of things, like being labeled a love bomber at something and that offended them forever, and being totally certain that that was the wrong thing to do, and not seeing you for any other dimension, only seeing a snapshot of life experience, that might be somebody who has introject constancy and excess certainty. A little bit of doubt cannot be allowed.
Obviously, the borderline develops an introject. So when she finds an intimate partner, he is constant as an object, as an external object, but she creates an introject of him because he is meaningful, significant. She can maintain the constancy of the object, but she cannot maintain the constancy of the introject. When the object is away, the introject degrades and fades to the point that it vanishes. And she has no representation of him in her mind. It's like he never existed. Or she develops extreme abandonment anxiety because she can't hang on to the introject. Whereas a healthy person develops an introject for life, essentially. The borderline would need to develop an introject every single time, every hour, I don't know, every day. No one can measure this. But all the time. She is busy developing introjects all the time.
So this is interesting, and this might be worth researching or considering. So if a borderline has external object constancy, and they have introject constantly falling apart, is there a way to use proxies, recordings, journals, or something to create a voodoo proxy of the external object so that the introject constancy is slowly built up as a muscle? So then that would counter abandonment terror. So instead of trying to keep it all in your head, why do you have to do that? You have technology. There's many ways of creating transition objects, Winnicott's term, so that your object constancy can now have a bit of permanency in your localized power. Now you can take your power back instead of dumping it all into one external object, your favorite person. Can you have substitute transition objects to symbolize that object, favorite person, so then you don't have to give all your power up to one person?
Because they don't hold. It's out of sight, out of mind. Simple. No mind. Nothing in the mind. Out of sight, nothing in the mind. The narcissist is opposite. The narcissist has introject constancy. The external object degrades and fades. Even when the external object is present, even when it's loving, even when it's caring, even in sex, even in, you name it, the object keeps degrading. Like the object is flickering in and out of existence. Zzz, zzz. So you're not sure if it's real. It's flickering there. But the introject of the object in your mind is stable as rock. It's rigid and it's stable.
Right here, that's the toxic certainty. That's a morality play. That's why they can be morally outraged at you for any sort of thing. Because in their head, they're totally certain what happened, who's wrong, who's right, and they'll be much faster in arguing that because they're not making any room for doubt or any other perspectives.
Because it doesn't really represent the external object. It's idealized. It has a life of its own. It interacts only with the internal object, not with you. And all this mess is intended to preserve the fantasy. The borderline introduces an object, and the narcissist introduces an introject, but it's shared, always shared.
Shared fantasy. So, Vaknin saying that toxic certainty is introject constancy, or that's my link. I'm going to try to reframe it as toxic certainty because that's easier to remember. I think it is. I mean, you can remember introject constancy. And then toxic comfort in Vaknin's model is object constancy. External object constancy with introjects that just fall apart constantly. So since the introjects fall apart constantly, they need tons of comfort, tons of emotional regulation. Because the inner world is falling apart, fragmenting into the void, shame spiral pit of despair. So they need external comfort to regulate this constant fragmentation or something. Or they could see that fragmentation is exciting. Why not? What's wrong with that? And then codependents fit in the middle with conform. So codependents are like the shared fantasy, so they need someone to do the opposite. So you'll people please and shapeshift and conform yourself. And then you just need someone to order you around. Someone with toxic comfort to tell you how, give you a purpose in life, a negative identity. Or you could have someone with toxic certainty to give you some structure, and that's the codependent's fawn self. Until you find your own form, until you inform yourself with what your soul wants, what your true nature is, you need toxic certainty or toxic comfort to fill in the gap to help you have a shared fantasy. And will this make sense for this other clip from back then? I don't know. Maybe here.
The main function of the new false self is to devalue reality. And so the child says, now I'm God. Now I'm God. He idealizes the false self. And then he devalues reality.
Okay.
Which is exactly what he's going to do for the rest of his life. He's going to idealize himself by idealizing his partner, a process called co-idealization. And then he's going to devalue her because she represents reality. She's an external object.
You're part of that shitty
You're
world
part of
out
this
there.
world that is attacking me, doesn't see my value and my worth, doesn't realize my divinity.
So when you have toxic levels of this, certainty or comfort or conformity, the reason why you have toxic levels of this is because you can't tolerate reality. You haven't built enough of a social skin to handle the discomfort of shared reality. You don't have enough of critical thinking, chaos muscle to handle the uncertainty of reality. And you don't have enough of your personal form and nature to flow with nature, so you're being a robot fawn conformed self because you don't know yourself. You weren't allowed to form and create your own identity, so then you have toxic conformity. So he's starting out describing the co-idealizations. That's more of a narcissist toxic certainty here. But the enemy is reality. So toxic certainty and toxic comfort, the enemy is reality. And I need a codependent to help me hold the shared fantasy together so I can block reality. But if you are codependent and you want to introduce reality to a toxic comfort or a toxic certainty person, they're going to attack you because reality is bad. So stop trying to bring truth to narcissists and borderlines.
You know, so I'm devaluing you. This is very crucial to understand. All the dynamics that the child goes through are replicated in future relationships. The child cannot separate from the mother. He doesn't allow his partner to separate from him. He doesn't do separation. The child idealizes the false self. He idealizes the partner in order to idealize himself, of course. The child devalues reality. He devalues the partner because she's part of reality. This cycle lasts till the very end of life. You're part of reality, and there's nothing borderlines and narcissists dread and hate more than reality. You're an agent of another kingdom, which is the enemy. You're an enemy. You're what we call a persecutory object, because you bring reality into the lives of the borderline and the narcissist and challenge the fantasy. See, if you offer the narcissist advice, for example, you imply that he's less than omniscient, or all-knowing. If you offer empathy, you imply that he's pitiful or in need of empathy. In need of. What do you mean in need of? God doesn't need anything. You're challenging grandiosity. In the case of the borderline, if you offer her advice or empathy, you are challenging the fantasy because you are broadcasting to her you are dysregulated. I mean, if I come to the borderline and say, listen, I really empathize with you, I understand what you're going through, that's bad strategy. Because it's like saying you're dysregulated now. And if you're dysregulated now, your fantasy is at risk. So there is no winning strategy. They are deeply wedded and committed to their fantasies. End of story.
There is no winning strategy? I don't know if I agree with that part. The obvious strategy of sharing reality, that is not going to work. That's too direct. But part of the winning strategy is realizing that the narcissism borderline strategies, toxic comfort, toxic certainty, are relational disorders. And they're schizoid core disorders. The schizoid core is blocking feedback. That sort of, let's see how he frames it.
But narcissism and borderline, at least, are relational disorders. For example, if the borderline or the narcissist were to be isolated, were to be, most of the manifestations of a disorder would vanish. There would be a total disintegration of the person, there would be psychosis, there would be attempted suicide, and so on. But 90, if not 99% of all the manifestations of borderline, behavioral manifestations, will vanish. Because it's relational. It's in relation to someone. By the way, the criteria themselves are relational. Even in the new model, about 80 or even 90% of the text is about interaction with other people. Both disorders are founded on an empty schizoid core. Schizoid simply means that you had internalized a bad object. By the way, so schizoid disorder starts with internalization of a bad object. And you have chosen to avoid all objects. For example, narcissists go a lot through schizoid phases. They have a lot of schizoid phases. Narcissist doesn't get supply. He isolates himself. He becomes schizoid. Similar, borderlines are similar. After a major trauma, rejection, humiliation, abandonment, they can go through a schizoid phase where they have no sex, they don't meet anyone, they become cat ladies, whatever.
So schizoid's isolation, though I like to say schizoid is folding in.
I was folding in, 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 no energy recycled outward. I was folding in, no energy recycled outward. I was folding in, no energy.
So part of a strategy, which was Nadia's visit, which I'll maybe try to do on Thursday to cover the details, was that trying to evoke a schizoid wound for a borderline and a narcissist abuser is getting them to fold in, because the goal of what they're doing with giving you a negative identity,
Who I am is in response to how I'm defined,
is they're trying to get you to fold in. They're trying to get you to go schizoid. Excessively self-centered. If you're worried about not doing the wrong thing, you're not seeing the mistakes they're making. It's a way of a shell game to get you to not pay attention, to over-focus on your flaws. But if a narcissist and borderline were also schizoid, it's just as easy to make them fold in.
I was folding in, 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 no energy recycled outward. I was folding in, no energy recycled outward. I was folding in.
And don't you already know that when you're talking to someone who's triggered, a narcissist, borderline, whoever? You feel when they're freaking out because they're paranoid. Or narcissists especially, they're paranoid and they're going to go on hyper attack to try to get you to fold in, to get you off their scent. That isn't a time to jump because they're paranoid and they're hyper defensive. That's a time to back off a little bit, but keep trying to get them to fold in. Gradually, gradually, gradually. If you jump in and then you attack them back, now they have a target. They can use that rope and start lobbing insults at you. And if you get into an insult battle back and forth, you've taken away them from folding in.
I was folding in, 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 I was.
If you give them a moral attack to attack you back, you've given them a rope away from folding in. You want them to look at themselves in shame at how much they are a loser they are. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to do more exposing. You just watch them flail around while they're folding in and just keep reflecting back that they're flawed, they're wrong. But if you overdo it, then they attack you and they have a rope out. That's the tricky technique. So schizoids.
Don't meet anyone. Yeah. They become cat ladies or whatever.
So would it, like a deep loathing and distrust of humanity and then a choice to self-isolate, that would be schizoid?
There's a schizoid phase. But
I know what I am now. That's great.
Schizoid phase.
And Richard Grannon admits to being schizoid. Yeah. Ownership. Schizoid phase. So what's the high road? How do you get out of conformity? I wasn't able to really set this up. That's because Vaknin's model is too complicated. So you guys need to shame him to make him get better at his model. Or shame me. Maybe I didn't digest it properly. So people need a relational identity, and maybe that's what's missing. So Jordan Peterson's description, I think that's pretty good.
Kids, you know, they weave up a fantasy world and then they play out an identity in that. And then they weave out another fantasy world and they play out an identity with that. And they shape that identity by their interactions with other children and adults.
They shape their identity through relationships with their other kids and relationships with adults. The identity requires relationships. If you don't have relationships, then your identity is schizoid.
I was folding in, 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 I was.
Because you can't fully mirror yourself. You need relationships with other people, role models, groups, adults and children, whatever, to shape an identity.
All part of this exploration of who they could be. The play is, in fact, the exercising of that realm of possibilities. And so a good father, a good parent, puts a border of security around the child. You know, and the mother might be inside that border of security when she has young children. And play can take place there. And the play is the investigation of multiple identities.
So that allows a person with toxic conformity to explore their nature within a structured proxy environment. But if you didn't have a parent that allowed you a structure or a group to play and explore relationships with other people, you can't find your true nature. You have to go hide in excess comfort or excess certainty, a negative identity, because you weren't able to explore different identities with different relationships to see what fits for you.
With the hope of finding one that is functional, that is also socially desired. because those things can't be dissociated. Your identity is not just how you feel about yourself at this moment.
Toxic comfort, how you feel about yourself at this moment.
And you can't impose that on other people because they don't know how to deal with that. Like, even if
imposing it on other people. Toxic certainty, a moral play. You must accept me because that's the ultimate good or whatever.
if they wanted to, they wouldn't know the rules of the game. You have to negotiate your identity with other people. And so then you have to think of identity as something that's negotiated with other people.
Which means identity is a relationship. If you have negotiating with someone means there's a relationship. You can't make an identity without a relationship. If you make an identity without relationships, that's a schizoid folding in.
I was folding in, no energy recycled outward. I was folding in, no energy recycled outward. I was
which is what we've all suffered through with COVID. That's why we have all this brain damage from being folding in too much energy inward. We fucked up our identity because of, the pandemic. Plus, while we're folding in, all the past pandemic intergenerational trauma is probably invading our brain, who knows. But that's a side thing. Relationships. You need identity. You need relationships for identity.
Part of your identity is your value to other people. That's a huge part of it. And that's not subjective. Other people make that decision. Other people make that decision.
And that's not comforting. The reality is we're hardwired to see if we have social value. We take pride if we're able to help others to have a place in society. But we're not in control of that. Or we're in control if we develop skills and we develop relationships, but we can't just demand people accept us. Or you can, but they don't have to listen. So you can demand it, but society is going to say, fuck you. So that's not comforting, so people don't tell you this. So he owns it by saying that.
Other people, that's a huge part of it. And that's not subjective. Other people make that decision. Other people make that decision. A lot of us is externalized because we're such social creatures. And everyone has weaknesses. You know, you're going to degenerate along your weakest axis. The primary obligation of a parent is to serve as a proxy for the social and the natural world. But let's say the social world. Why? Well, because you want to train your child to be not only acceptable socially, but highly desirable socially.
That's a more adaptive form of conforming. Can you change your public form, your public persona, to be highly desirable and highly socially valuable? So then you'll have more nurturing relationships. You'll have more options. We're losing Frankie. Yeah. But if you don't know yourself, it can't explore your nature, then you can't explore your potential of being a better self, a more ingrained self. So then you fall back into people pleasing as your toxic conformity. And then you look for someone to rescue. Someone who has toxic certainty. You want to argue with them and convince them that they're deluded. You'll lose. Or someone with toxic comfort. You'll please them first, and then now you want to help them grow up, and they'll just flood you. And it's a beautiful toxic relationship.
And the reason for that is that by the time they're about 3 to 4 is the transition period, they're going to be spending more time being socialized by their peers than by you. And that will increasingly be the case as they develop. And if you haven't encouraged them through judicious attention to be socially desirable, they're going to be rejected by their peers, and then they fall farther and farther behind on the developmental trajectory.
They'll be rejected by their peers, and then they could have abandonment terror. It's not their fault they have abandonment terror. The parents didn't give them a role to find their true nature. They're not conforming to be a socially valuable person, so people reject them. And rejection hurts. So then when they get rejected in the future, they have abandonment terror, but they have abandonment terror because psychologists want to stigmatize and shame people. So they'll label you with CPTSD and PTSD or whatever borderline, they'll say of abandonment terror. But it's not really abandonment terror. It's not a comfort issue. It's a conform issue. You need a social skin, a social persona to navigate the world, to build relationships and get shit done and have fun. That's the bigger problem. That's the developmental challenge.
They can't be the sort of person that insists that everyone else always play the game they chose. Part of what I was doing.
Yes, that's toxic certainty.
Constantly as a clinical psychologist was helping people craft an ever more sophisticated identity. And what you want to have the kind of identity that makes people line up to want to play with you. If you have to use force to get people to comply, it is a sign that you're not playing a very good game. Now, maybe you can't think up a better one. There's nothing that's going to work. A state of emergency might, because we allow governments to use extra force during a state of emergency.
So this is a shortcut. If you don't have a group to learn how to have a social identity to practice relationships, state of emergency is a way to have quick connection.
But nobody thinks that's optimal. Yep. So if people won't play because you're inviting them, then the game isn't configured very well, and it's very unlikely to be stable. Think of identity as...
Oh, you didn't go into details. So state of emergency identity is just make something urgent, and then that's your identity.
Their reaction is so strong. Gosh, maybe I did say something offensive. So strong. Maybe I did say something offensive. Their reaction is so...
They're basically having an emotional reaction and blaming you. They're basically having...
This is what toddlers do. They throw tantrums when reality doesn't play out in the way they think it will. This is what toddlers do. They throw tantrums when reality...
I'm just whining. I'm just whining. Someone say it right now. Someone say it...
Like you're attacking me. I'm sorry, you're not being helpful to me right now. Being helpful to me.
Their reaction is so strong. Gosh, maybe I did say something offensive. So strong.
So a shortcut intimacy is to have heightened emotional reactions, tantrums, to create a state of emergency in you or the other person, and that becomes your identity. And then you can be a professional victim or a professional urgency drama person. And that's your life. That's a way of finding a social place. It's also a way of getting things done. You can just flood people. So it's not, he's saying it's a bad identity. I'm saying it's not bad.
And there's nothing that's going to work. A state of emergency might, because we allow governments to use extra force.
Yeah, governments, we allow bigger organizations. So as a person, he's saying shit talking. I'm saying state of emergency identity is not bad. It works. It works for, abusers.
During a state of emergency. But nobody thinks that's optimal.
Yeah.
So if people won't play because you're inviting them, then the game isn't configured very well, and it's very unlikely to be stable. Think of identity as something that's negotiated with other people. Part of your identity is your value to other people. Other people make that decision. Other people make that decision. They can't be the sort of person that insists that everyone else always play the game they chose. Think of identity as something that's negotiated with other people. Negotiated with other people. Negotiated with other people.
Relationship. Negotiated with other people, it's a relationship. It's an exchange. It's a conversation. An energetic exchange to slowly build or test out identities. So multiple relationships, multiple interactions, then you find yourself. You create a social identity. That's the way out of conformity. Ooh. Archons. Archons in control.
The Archons are the great enemies of humanity. Your very life itself is being fed on. The Archons are the great enemies of humanity. Your very life itself is being fed on. The Archons are the great enemies of humanity. Your very...
Was that enough for an ending? We need something else. Where is it?
I identify as a tetad. Boobs on my head. Boobs. I identify as a tetad. 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 I identify as a tetad. Boobs on my head. Boobs. I identify as a tetad. Tetad. Tetad.
That is fucking terrifying. That is fucking terrifying. That is fucking terrifying.
When do I get my results, Master? When do I get my results, Master?
Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
Threatened by anyone who tries to get close to you, just back, back, back. Threatened by anyone who tries to get close to you, just back, back, back. Threatened by anyone who tries to get close to you, just back, back.
You are not a victim, you are someone who had been victimized. You are not a victim, you are someone who had been victimized. You are not a victim, you are someone who had been victimized. You are not a victim, you are someone who had been victimized. You are not a victim, you are someone who had been victimized. You are not a victim, you are someone who had been victimized. You are not a victim, you are someone who had been victimized. You are
That's all, folks.
Oh no, oh no.
Nothing for you.
Ooh. Okay, that was the clunky ending for a weird topic. Did anybody absorb the breakdown? Toxic comfort, toxic certainty, toxic conformity, borderline defense, codependent defense, narcissistic defense. And the enemy is shared reality, because reality is complicated. That's all. So, as you develop a better relationship with reality and other people, then you won't need as much toxic comfort, toxic conformity, and toxic certainty. Because you'll cooperate with reality, and then reality will allow you to have more shared fantasy if you are able to not find reality so threatening. Or you can memorize introject constancy, object constancy, schizoid and internal, bad object internalization, psychotic states, and all the other jargon that Vaknin was making, which is simplifying some of object relations, but yeah, it was kind of So 9 o'clock, 9:15, I've pushed it a little later. That's our formal ending. People are welcome to drop off or take a nap or go to sleep or go party, right? It's Labor Day weekend. Go live it up. Or there's after party where we could have something exciting. But last time was pretty chill. I'm not sure today's energy or today's group. Feedback, questions, cookies. Was this any good? How will you apply it? I don't want just blind cheerleading.
As far as I can see it, that it's the best option is to go for exploring your own nature, because then you don't need to balance between going to the comfort or going to the certainty.
Well, I framed this more as opposites in person, but we didn't really get into it. But for toxic comfort, we were talking about like a mother who has a daughter who has borderline tendencies who floods her. I used the tithead metaphor because she was afraid of getting trapped there. She didn't know how to get her space. So the idea is to trigger, I need to be alive. So someone who's in comfort avoidance, the world is scary. The world doesn't feel safe. I need more healing. I don't feel strong enough. So you have to flood them with too much attention or give them no comfort, so you trigger the desire to live. So you can smother them with too much attention, where they actually push you off to say, I need more, I need space, I need to live, I need to explore. So, and then when they have successes at living, I accomplished something, I did something, I shared my rage and the world didn't fall apart, whatever. Then they have this internal sensation of living, so they don't need to search for external comfort as much. Okay? Now, granted, yes, a codependent who's so used to being conforming and fawning, you need to explore your true nature. You need to find yourself, so that's a good answer. But it's not to avoid the other toxicities. So someone who has toxic certainty, that's learning how to have healthy doubt. This is critical thinking. So this is learning to have skepticism, critical thinking, a scientific mindset, empiricism, to test your certainty, to have humility and doubt, or grace. You're living in grace. You're not ordering God around. So if you have too much certainty, you can also have some healthy doubt or grace, or I don't find the best counterbalance for certainty. But maybe it's critical thinking, but that didn't sound as good. Humility, something. You have hubris, certainty, moral, righteousness, and then you have humanity. So certainty might be like shared humanity. You got to find. We don't know. We're human. We can't know everything. So it's just finding the middle ground of these sort of three dimensions of existence. And these probably link to emotions also. But I didn't. Maybe it's sadness, anger, and fear. Sadness, anger, guilt. And this probably linked to three core emotions. But the words don't really matter. Part of the teaching was that if I can model the teaching and I can get you guys to act out the modeling, you'll absorb it. That's my challenge with Jonathan Haidt. He's got some great pointers. They're very precise. They're very accurate. They're backed up by research. But the way he's delivering it, his tone is so flat and academic, he's not embodying the teachings. There's going to be a dissonance between downloading the teachings because of his academic argument style. His energy, his vibe is very persuasive from an academic standpoint. But that's not going to give you the gumption to apply it when a troll is yelling at you on social media. When you're insulted, you're still going to respond back. And Jonathan Haidt's like nice pacifist language is not going to, you're not going to remember his teaching under fire because the role modeling doesn't match. That's where I think Bill Burr is good, to sort of show how somebody can embody aggression and insults well. But he's also somewhat one-dimensional. But he's good. So, like, he's owning his strength and weakness. So, let me see how this goes on video.
I'm
You're
a
into
robot.
avoidance.
I am. I don't know how to fix it, but I understand
Well, what
it.
is it? What is your anger?
It's feeling like I'm not going to be heard. I realized that I had issues that I thought I was past. That's what fucked me up. But see, you feel like, all right, so I've taken care of that. Now I can focus on this. And it's like, no, this is still in this pile. You thought it was 6 feet high. It's 12 feet high. And it was demoralizing. So
It was demoralizing. That's the right, accurate term. Moral certainty. Certainty is morality, because ultimate certainty is God. God is ultimately right, omniscient, omnipresent, blah, blah, blah. So morality and certainty are essentially equal. Or the ultimate certainty is purity, God, morality. So he had a certainty that he was only 6 foot of shit or something.
it's 12 feet high. And it was, no, this is still in this pile. You thought it was 6 feet high. It's 12 feet high. And it was demoralizing.
So he estimated it was 6 feet. He was certain. Then he found out it was 12 feet of crap. And that was demoralizing. So codependents who have a moral injury because of the trauma, they go into what's good and bad, what's evil, what's righteous. These questions come up. And then you're rife for narcissistic abuse, because narcissists, they have a rigid inner core. They worship themselves. That's Vaknin's model. They're religious to themselves, to their shared fantasy, whatever. So they're carrying this excess certainty and a godlike morality. And a codependent who's lost looking for answers, that's a narcissist is happy to tell you what's happening in their world. Not for you. They'll be confident telling you what's going on in your world. But good night, Dave.
Don't you think no one is part of the way to fix it, though?
That's a comforting answer, see? Joe Rogan's a bit of a codependent.
Yeah, but then you have to go through the torture of it. It's not like, like the Dr. Phil episode. You need to understand, fucking yell at people, whatever the fuck. And you go, oh, okay, thanks, Phil. And like, you're just going to go do that. And then you have to do the fucking work. And it's so easy to just, it's a deep groove worn into your personality, and you're trying to get out of the rut. And it's just easy to go back into it and just be on autopilot.
People like
Asshole
psychedelics.
autopilot. What I experienced as a kid made me go to this mental place. Fuck it, I don't care, I don't need it, I don't give a shit. And that's what caused everything to get walled off.
But that fuck it place is what codependents need, so you can role model for us how to be in that state of fuck it. I'm going to just do it and taste it and try it and see what my true nature is. Instead of conforming, I will say fuck it. Take a risk. That's what we need. So he's a good role model for that. He might not be a good role model for temperance of his anger, but you can learn that from someone else. You don't need a role model that matches every trait.
I just realized there's just shit in me I have not dealt with. Death of friends, all of that shit is just sitting in here. It's not all just that I'm not going to get what I want. A lot of that is like, you got all of this shit that you're sitting on. The only way for the steam to come out is like for you to snap, which is really not fair to the people around you, to be honest with you. So, I don't know.
Have you gone to therapy?
See, his questions are more comfort seeking. How do I say something positive, or how do I help encourage you? I can't just hear all this depressing, hopeless, frustration stuff. That's his. codependent nature. He had parents that were abusive, so that's part of Rogan's story. That's why he's like all buffed up and muscular. Physical abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What about meditating? You ever meditate?
Yeah, but I find the guy's voice is fucking annoying.
You don't have to listen
He
to
won't
a
shut
guy.
up. And then he's using this really soothing, caring voice that makes me face all of that shit that I didn't get growing up, which makes me angry at this person that's trying to help me. And, you know, I'm having my head down, and we're playing no contact. And because it was really my fault. I had my head down, and this guy fucking knocked me down on the other team. And he goes, "Are you all right?" Yeah, what I said to that guy, I still fucking regret. I was so mad at him that he was caring in that moment. It was like, what is wrong with me?
You're really...
There's nothing wrong with him. That was his defense. If he showed compassion, or the dad showed compassion, it got hammered or attacked. So he learned to have the armored shell, or just to be honest. He had to fight to get his voice out. That's what he's good at. But psychology has judged him for having a hot temper and whatever else. So he's trying to manage it. But just judging himself and shaming himself, that's counterproductive. It is accurate, but it's counterproductive. You have to honor your wound. You have to honor your defense, your overreaction. Take that skill. He sort of owned that his comedy is because of his life trauma. But if he just judges that as all bad and tries to overwrite it, it's not going to integrate as well. It's a much harder path.
Really trying to come to grips with all this shit right now.
Yeah, because I don't want to pass this shit on to my
your
kids. That's
So,
what happens. And
as
it's
they're
just
growing
like,
up.
I am too in here to understand me. I have a very weird thing. I have an alley of my personality that works that I somehow turned into a living.
Yeah.
But the rest of it looks like Fred Sanford's yard. Old radiators and bed frames and shit. It's a fucking mess. I'm
You're
a
into
robot.
avoidance.
I am.
You learn to be a robot, but maybe that's what codependents need. If you want to do gray rock and no contact, you have to do it with a robotic form. And that's this sort of attitude.
Some people just don't have a sense of humor. And how do you relate to or deal with these types of people?
If I'm doing stand-up,
Yeah.
this is some inside shit. All right. This is
This
what I
is
would
his
do. When there
robot
would be somebody
mentality.
like you're killing everybody, and there was just that one person that's just sitting there and they're not laughing and they're not laughing. That bugs a comic. You're just like, they couldn't fucking get that one person. It will ruin their night. I started realizing how stupid that was. I was like, if I was a president and this was my approval rating, I would be fucking killing it. So I finally decided I'm going to have fun with this person. So what I would do is
So just telling himself he was president, that'd be comfort seeking. That's crap. He wants more. He wants a victory. This is the robot strategy. This is something that will make you feel alive. See? So instead of telling yourself a comforting lie to quash your life force, he took that, then he figured out a way to be more alive. So it's not, you don't quash your need for comfort. You don't force yourself to feel discomfort. You trigger your life force, your libido, what makes you feel alive. And what made him feel alive? Let's see.
like, you can't see the people who are doing it in the back, but it was the people who were up front.
Yeah.
So they would be like right there, and they're just like, you could feel their energy. So what I would start to do I would overcommit to my jokes, act even sillier, and I would send all of them right out over their head. And the best thing would be if they were close in the front row, I would be standing right up on them. And my favorite thing to do would be make some sweeping gesture like over their head. Like I would literally be like, and my dad says to me, and I'm just totally just living my dream, like right in their face, right over them. And it would just drive them up the fucking wall. And then I would keep throwing in like, God, you guys are great. I am having such a great time up here. That was the show within the show for that one fucking asshole. I learned all of those types of things through years of doing it, through basically, am I going to take this as a negative or a positive, and realizing I have the power to decide, like, I can let this guy ruin my night, or let this woman ruin my night, or I can have fun with this.
I have the power to decide, will I seek comfort in being small, or will I take the risk and feel bigger and more alive, and will I build on that through multiple life experiences to let the feeling of being alive and being full and enjoying myself and owning the room and letting that be my comfort zone, my pleasure zone, my being.
It's the same thing, like if you ever do like the Late Show and only like 8 people showed up, I made the mistake of coming out with 8 people energy, and it sucked. And then one night I was just like, you know what, fuck this, I'm gonna go out and just try to kill these 8 people enough that they bring 8 more. And then I went out with this positive thing, and then that so got ingrained into my work ethic. Like the other day I had a buddy of mine who was on his way up going like, he was going, oh dude, he goes, you know, the old club owner just told me that we only got 34 people on the Late Show tonight, and I literally felt like this jolt going through me, like just being like, oh, fucking destroy them. Fucking destroy them. And make them bring 34 more. Because if you're not the guy, which I wasn't, I was never the whatever the fuck they were looking for. That's the only way to do it. You just gotta hack your way through. Realizing I have the power to decide. Totally just living my dream, like right in their face, right over them. Realizing I have the power to decide. You just gotta hack your way through.
So we need role models of people that have hacked their way through, so you know the right energy. If you're listening to a wounded healer that's performing that they hacked the way through, you're going to download their energy. Their frequency of what they're talking about, you're going to sense. So you can't copy somebody's lack of expertise, even if the wording and the teaching is correct. Bill Burr. Oh, we already got the answer. So, and a comedian gets instant feedback if they're on the road and doing stand-up, so they have to refine their delivery and their pointers with a live audience, so they can't fool themselves as much. So that this libido, so if you can take comfort and then turn it into feeling alive, then you can get away from the codependence feeling of being alive by having certainty, by guilt tripping themselves. That's part of the Fairbairn moral defense theory that I haven't ironed out fully. It's sort of this audio podcast.
As children, omnipotence is a developmental stage, right?
Yeah.
We want, because if we feel out of control, then it means the world is not safe. If we cannot control our mom to give us milk, then we might die, right? What if she doesn't come to give us, right? So we need that illusion of being of omnipotence, the illusion that we can control others. And as grown-ups, we use it in the same way. We use it when we feel the world is not safe. When we need to have the illusion that we control things and we could do anything, right? Because otherwise we're too frightened, you know?
So that's the grandiosity. So she's talking about control and certainty. And codependents choose the self-guilt path. I can do better, the perfection path. That's a moral path, moral judgment on self or the whole world. And that creates a sense of certainty or order or control because the world is too chaotic. You're flooded by too much chaos. So you choose a path of
So what
power
is a very, very common form of omnipotence?
Or
guilt.
omnipotence.
Feel like it's your fault.
There's
You
guilt.
are so powerful that everything is your fault.
Yes.
If someone in the far away children dying in Africa is because you are so powerful that you're supposed to be able to save them and you can't.
Your donation will save
Children,
them.
then their parents get divorced, for example. That's something everybody can relate to, right? Because we all know that children can blame themselves, right? And obviously, it's not the child's fault, right? As grown-ups, we also know that. But as a child, we could understand why that is a useful
I'm supposed
defense.
to be able to save my mother. I'm supposed to be able to make my mom happy. She's not happy. Therefore, it must be my fault.
Right. And why is it my fault? Because if it's not my fault, I can't fix it. I can't do anything about it. It means that the world could be chaotic and bad, and I'm just hopeless and helpless in that world. I cannot do anything. It makes me feel helpless. So what is the defense against helplessness? Omnipotence. It's all my fault.
I must have caused that. 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 I must have caused that.
So you do self-blame, and then you judge. Therapy will judge you for self-blame or self-hate. But the reason why you're self-blaming is because the world is chaotic. So if you make the world less chaotic, if you develop a relational self that can navigate the world and give you more options, then you aren't going to need to self-blame yourself as much. The defense naturally drops. But if you judge your self-blame with more self-blame, that gives you more of a power omnipotence high. So you're having 2 layers of guilt on yourself to create a feeling of being powerful. But if you can take toxic comfort and turn it into enjoying risk and taking gradual risks that makes you feel more alive, then slowly that feeling of being alive and being lively will be a higher high than comfort. You're living. Your libido is flowing towards some creative outlet, some creative expression. So you don't need to shame yourself for being comfort-seeking. You don't have to shame yourself for being too conforming. You don't have to shame yourself for being narcissistic, rigid, fragile, whatever strategy. You can pursue life force and creativity, but it does require you to have a social form where you're not constantly running to landmines of social sanctions and relationship breakups because you don't know how to navigate social function, basic social interactions, blah, blah, blah.